Sandy.
Amy.
How are you?
I feel like I'm still in her living room.
I know.
3 weeks in a row. Surprise. We take 2 sessions in one day.
We're still at my house.
Surprise.
I love it.
Surprise.
This is so
Sandy
fun.
moved in.
It's fun because I'm so used to giving you signals across Zoom and things like that now I'm like,
it's much easier in person.
It's so much fun.
I mean, Zoom is a great vehicle, but it's so much better in person.
And I'm going to tell you one of the problems that I'm having with this, just so you know, is I always have things pulled up for research. And so a lot of times when you and I are talking, I'm like trying to I try to listen and I'm trying to be engaging, but then I keep catching myself going down to prepare to pull up the research because we're doing a podcast.
Amy,
so I just want to apologize.
You don't need to apologize because this is how Amy and Sandy work. Sandy shows up and she's thought about it. She's thought about it a lot and she's got some random thoughts, and Amy is prepared and she's looking at her research, which Sandy's like, oh, that's great research. So you don't need to apologize. I'm thanking you for that.
Well, I just want to let you know
because I'm not looking at anything but my coffee.
I'm trying to give some quality time and be engaged without my devices, but I'm still looking down at my devices, because so I apologize.
It's for good reason.
Right.
The motive is pure.
The motive is pure. That's very
it's a
true.
very kind act.
I know.
To be prepared.
Good. That's an act of kindness. Yes. So this week we're talking about acts of kindness. Mm-hmm. And this podcast, I should say, we just recorded the last podcast. So we're in the same week, but we're talking about acts of kindness. And this came about because you surprised me. And so we started talking about surprises. Right. You surprised me by showing up, which we talked about last time. But then we started talking about acts of kindness and how it was fun to give surprises and do acts of kindness. And so you've been here for a week surprising people. Were you doing acts of kindness too as part of that, or was it just more of surprising?
You know, I was in some ways, but I almost hate to say that because to me it sounds like I'm full of myself. Like I visited an aunt we had a family wedding and she was worried about technology, but I don't give myself that much credit because I didn't fly back to help her with technology. It was really good timing. Right. And I was happy to do it. So I hate to highlight and say, oh, look at me. It was an act of kindness. She was very grateful. So I think when people are grateful, because I guess I could have been doing something different, but I would never have thought anything differently. The people that I showed kindness to are people that give me kindness all the time. And so it gave me an opportunity to pay it back.
So that's a very interesting thought because when we had this whole scheme of we're going to have this week, we're going to talk about surprises and acts of kindness and our podcast next week. So we had this whole week to kind of think and act. And our intention was we're going to get videos of acts of kindness and even doing acts of kindness and surprising people and getting videos and asking them about it. I could not pull myself up to do a video of an act of kindness. I felt very self-serving. Exactly. It was very self-serving, like self-focused. And it was about me and our podcast. And it wasn't about the act of kindness. It was more of a show. And so I didn't get any videos because I was really conflicted about it.
Right, because like you said, did you do things that were act of kindness? I feel like it's about me if I'm doing that. You know what I mean? Like I'm doing it for the wrong intent.
Right.
Because I want to perform this.
Authentic.
It didn't feel authentic. And, I would hope that if the opportunity presents itself, I'm always going to respond in an act of kindness. We all have our moments of, oh, wow, I wasn't so nice there. Right. One quick story, because the one thing I did remember, it was the first time I ever had an experience of getting trolled. It was 12 years ago. It started with, I had a very good friend whose couple, his sister was dying of cancer. And it was in conversation that they had brought up that she had a bucket list and they had a young daughter and she was going to die. and they had a bucket list. They love to travel. They love to take pictures. And somehow, and I don't remember all the details, but I'm like, I bet we could, if I brought this out there and, if we started asking, all you got to do is ask. I bet we could raise some money really quickly and not have to wait on Make-A-Wish or what have you.
Right.
And she could do some trips before she left without worrying about money.
Right.
And so it started out of me sending random emails out, and I clients, people, I just asked and I said, and so the theme was random acts of kindness. Okay.
Mhm.
Random acts of kindness are really supposed to be more secretive, right? Like you don't have to know who the person was. So the intent was just to gather money, and it didn't, and then we used the church that she went to, and it's like, just give it to her, right? It wasn't about me. And then my sister-in-law, Robbie, helped out with it. But what had happened is somebody forwarded it to a news station, like Mallory Maddox got a hold of me, and they kept calling it Random Acts of Kindness. But at this point in my mind, it was, hey, if we can raise more money, great. And then maybe for the daughter, and they can do trips for several years. Nothing bad can come out of it. When they did the news story, somebody was trolling and saying, wow, not very random when you have to go pat yourself on the back and go on TV. And I wish I didn't think at the time, because I wasn't thinking about me, that those words were contradictory to the story.
Right.
But the intent was good. But it was the first time that I had to take a step back and say, oh my gosh, like this is how they're looking at me, because they think I'm trying to make this, we're trying to say it's all about us and get on TV.
Right.
But it just escalated to that point. So maybe because of that, I'm a little like, I don't want to bring things up because I thought I wasn't that person. And I guess that's what trolling's all about, is to attack somebody because it's easy to throw something out there. And I'd never thought I was looked at in that light.
Well, and that wasn't your intention.
No.
So when, like, as you tell the story, it came across maybe that, oh, look at them tooting their horn, that they're doing these random acts of
random act of kindness.
Right,
Those
right,
two gals can be
right.
on TV.
Right. But that wasn't your intention. Your intention was to go on TV to raise more money.
We did
and
great.
so it was like, maybe they shouldn't have called it random acts of kindness.
Right.
But anyway, it is what I think the intention is what really matters.
And sometimes you do get lost. If you really are doing something pure of heart, you're not thinking. So the reality was, I wasn't thinking how it looked from the outside.
Right.
If somebody really was
Very
doing it as a
true.
PR episode, they would have been all over that.
Right.
And they'd say, this is how you're going to, but we weren't thinking about that because it didn't matter.
Right. That is such a good point, because if you're being authentic about your intentions, then you're not thinking about how it could look bad, because you're only seeing the positive intentions that you have.
Getting the message out.
Completely. Oh my gosh. That's like, that's
and
a click on
good. It was good too to remember that the people, back to acts of kindness, and the core theme we're talking about here is, if your intent is good and you want to do something kind, the people that are the recipient are going to know that, and never once, if you're doing it with authenticity and it is pure of motive, they're going to feel that gift that you're giving to them.
Right.
And they never thought about it that way. So these people, they don't matter. And that's the whole thing about trolls, is to remember they don't matter.
Right.
And you have to get past,
don't know you,
because they don't know.
Yeah.
Has it changed doing acts of kindness? No, but I'm much more aware of not just, and maybe even with these people, there are a lot of people that scam, right?
Right.
So it made me more aware of, if you're going to put something out in the public, and if you want to motivate people to do the same, be a little bit more careful in what that looks like.
Right. And just be careful you're not just tooting your own horn.
Right.
Like, if you are really doing things to toot your horn, which I'm just going to tell you, this whole week I was very conflicted, because I was trying to be intentional about doing more acts of kindness.
Right.
But then I also knew we were doing this podcast. So I was like, am I going to be tooting my own horn, even talking about it?
Right.
But I was like, all right, it's okay, because I want to share like some of the responses.
Which would be great. Because here's what's funny is, when we left, we were talking about a lot of things. I ended up taking the angle of not doing acts of kindness, but asking people if they experienced recent acts of kindness.
Mhm.
So I kind of took a different angle. And it is funny how people really made them think a little bit. Like
Right.
it wasn't like they just came up with something. They had to think about it. But tell me about yours. I'm anxious to hear
Well,
about yours.
sometimes acts of kindness are just simple things. So it may not be memorable, but in the moment, it makes you feel good. And that was kind of more of what I was like, because I kept thinking, oh, I could go and give someone a huge tip. I could, but then it starts to turn a little bit more self-serving of, oh, that would be a fun little thing to tell somebody, And so it was, so I was like, instead of thinking big, I'm going to think of just little moments, little things.
I love that.
And then that's where I focused my week on doing little things.
And I'm a firm believer that many small things are even more important than one big thing. Like your
Yeah.
tipping comment, I tip really well during COVID, especially because I
Yeah.
feel for the workers. But rather than being like that one person to give this $200 tip, I spread the love.
Right.
And I always over tip, but
right. A lot of people
a
get
lot
that
of
over
people
tip.
get a little, that's just kind of how I do it. And
Yeah.
I'll tell people a lot when they're like, I don't know my purpose, we do the workshops and this isn't really big and sexy and and it's like you're making probably more impact because you're doing this, what you think is a little thing consistently all the time, and you're impacting a lot of people.
Right.
Maybe you're an advocate, maybe
Yeah.
you're, there's a lot of different things. You're a mentor. Does that mean you have to be the CEO of Big Brothers Big Sisters? No, that doesn't mean that you have the same
Right.
impact as that.
Right.
So little things, so good. I like the, and always remember the little things. And maybe that's why people that are really good at it, they're not remembering everything because they're just trying to consistently do small things all the time.
Right. Or they're receiving small acts of kindness all the time. And so it just kind of makes your moment better. Sometimes your day better, but it doesn't make a year better.
Right.
It just kind of, it's like, oh, that was nice. Someone held the door open for me. That was nice.
And don't you think it pays it forward because it reminds the person who's the recipient to maybe chill out a little bit,
right,
or
right,
pay it forward to somebody else because it felt good.
You just hope that that's what happens.
Right.
That's the dream. We hope it happens like that
do
for everybody.
Kind and then say surprise.
Right. Right. Okay. So acts of kindness that I did. So I started off, in a dilemma, like thinking, what can I do? What can I do? So it took me a couple of days. And then Sunday I baked cookies, and I was like, oh, I could like give these to neighbors as a surprise and all this. And so sorry, neighbors, you guys didn't get any cookies. But then I was just like, everybody at my house was like, oh, you're making cookies. Oh, you're making. And so I'm like, okay, this is just an act of kindness to my family for a non-event, just to make cookies. And Trevor was hilarious because he's like, you should do this every day.
Very good, Mom. Can I pick out your theme for next week?
I know, exactly. It was pretty funny. I'm like, no, because then I'll be eating cookies all the time.
Don't say no to your kids' week.
Right. Have you seen that movie Yesterday?
No.
It's pretty funny.
Is it pretty funny?
I enjoyed it. I was like, oh, that's pretty hilarious. So I baked some cookies, sent some to Taylor for all of her college friends, which is always a good gig. And so that was fun. And then I was like, all right, what else can I do? And it's very interesting to me because I focused a lot on my family. That was the other thing. I'm like, boy, isn't that interesting that I'm so comfortable doing acts of kindness to people I'm close to. So then I started thinking, my sister just moved into a new house. My daughter just moved into a new apartment. So I was like, oh, I'm going to send them some gifts for housewarming and say, just a little reach out and say congratulations, whatever. So it was that.
Nice.
Right. But then I started thinking, okay, I need to step out of my family and let's do some different things. And so I started doing reviews online of small businesses.
What a great idea.
I know. And that was actually a lot of fun because I'm like, it made me feel so good because I run a small business. And so whenever somebody gives a positive review, I'm always like, oh, that's so nice that they took the time to do that. And so I spent about an hour one morning just going through and giving positive reviews, and it felt really good.
That's great. That's a great idea too. And it's an act of kindness and it's authentic because you really do, you're just taking the time you're giving. Is there any gift more than time and intention?
Right. And that was the other thing when I was thinking through all these things I could do. I could spend $1,000 doing acts of kindness,
Right.
or I can just give my words and my time. And that's what I decided. That was the thing that stuck out the most to me
Mhm.
as far as, oh, that felt good. I like that. And I got a couple of replies too. And it was
Nice.
just that, acknowledging it.
And isn't it interesting? So you're being, thinking of ways to perform acts of kindness, but then how we kind of go back to our value set, right? And what we go toward, like for you, you're like, I'm just a lot with this it was family. And then, experiences like what would I appreciate, right? And so
Right.
you're thinking of
Right.
that. One thing that was going through my head as we're talking about this is how sometimes of course you do acts of kindness to make yourself feel better too, because it doesn't, there's truth to that, because
Right.
it sure feels better than being a bitch, doesn't it?
Right.
It's the opposite of feeling icky. So it's like, well, gosh, if I can do something nice for somebody else, just like gratitude feels good, right?
Right.
But I remember when the first Easter after or in the middle of my divorce, I had a couple things happening. I didn't have a family to go to Easter with because it was my husband's family that was here and my kids were with him for Easter. So it was the first time I had been ever
wow.
displaced in my life. And how I responded to it is, and again, at the time, it was not a lot of thought process. It was like this innate thing. I found other people. One was my aunt that I just talked to that also didn't have family in town. And I used to take her to a lot of the family gatherings. And then also some friends or family members that didn't have things till later in the day. And I organized, we went to Ronald McDonald House and we served breakfast and brought them breakfast. And then we also went to an assisted living and handed out Beanie Babies. We played some games. We walked around. We knew a few people there. But the reality is think about it. What I was doing was, number one, is I had this void and I thought, well, I got to do something with it. I can't wallow. I've got to do something with it that's positive. But I sought out people, and I never thought about this till right now. I sought out people that were going to be alone like me. That was, I knew that like at Ronald McDonald House, it was probably going to be pretty quiet because
Right.
you're not going to have appointments at the hospital.
Right.
Staff is going to be with their family. These are people that aren't at home and they're not with their families. And same with assisted living. They might come pick people up later, but if they weren't with their families, they probably weren't going to be, right?
Right.
And it is interesting how back to we do things for us. And you hate to say, now we're circling back to that whole, I don't want to make it that I'm doing it for me, but there is kind of an element of that, isn't there?
Yes, there is. Yes. And let's take a quick break.
Okay.
And then we're going to talk about the research.
Okay.
So, you know me, I always do a little research.
So I want to know if I'm selfish in my kindness. That's what I want to know. Am I being selfish?
No, you're not being selfish. But the research I did is, why do we do acts of kindness? Like, why does it feel good to do random acts of kindness? And there's several reasons. So I'm going to list, and you can comment on these reasons if you want. It releases positivity. We feel better, and the recipients of our acts feel better, which then makes them more likely to be kind to other people. So that is what we were talking about earlier. We hope that whatever we're doing is bringing kindness, not only to that person, but it just keeps rolling into.
Like it. Okay, that makes sense.
All right. Neurochemicals, we get this helper's high, which is kind of what we were talking about with surprises too. We get that
because we're doing it. It's kind of a medication. Like for me, the example I gave was I was low and I wanted to feel better. And so it was partially self-serving because it was my own therapy that do something for somebody else and stop thinking about yourself.
Yeah, it's called the healing power of doing good. And it's the same ones that are activated by kindness and compassion. Like, so, you're doing good, but also if you were receiving kindness, it would be the same type of feeling. All right.
I like that. And that's not a bad thing, right?
And not a bad thing. So nothing
Okay.
says that you're selfish.
Okay.
There's no research that says you're selfish here. Okay. I didn't find that.
But if you go on TV and say, hey, guess what? I'm doing a random act of kindness. to the
Right.
broadcast world," it
That's
comes
a little
across
self-serving,
bad.
but that wasn't your intention. So, okay. So it reduces pain, which I thought this was interesting. Doing acts of kindness reduces pain.
That makes some sense to me, though.
Does it?
Do you have less time to think about your pain? Because I'm sorry, you're focusing your brain on, I'll use there's always a story, but one time we were in Kansas City and I swore I didn't feel, we went to a concert with other friends eons ago, before kids, and maybe we had kids, they were young, but I kept saying, I don't feel good, I need to go get a strep test, and it was in a mall, and we started shopping. And amazingly enough, I was perfectly fine once I had my mind off of it. So we have this running joke about, well, Sandy had strep throat until she started shopping. But
That's
sometimes if your mind overthinks something,
Mhm.
so that was a pain, but there's other pains that you get so preoccupied. Or my friend that we got done running and she pulls a piece of glass out of her shoe and she's like, we had so many good conversations, I didn't want to stop.
Oh my gosh.
But you can, idle time has you thinking about things.
I'm just going to tell you, the brain is amazing. That's the stuff that and I think it is probably part of it, is if you're thinking about something different, then you're not noticing what's happening in your body.
Right.
Yeah.
Never thought of that though.
Oh, I didn't either. Interesting. It enhances the oxytocin, the release of oxytocin when people are engaged in kindness behavior. In turn, bonds between those who are kind to one another are strengthened, which makes sense. And it enhances our both physical and mental health. Many physical ailments are either precipitated by or aggravated by stress. Kindness reduces stress. I thought that was interesting too, because I never connected kindness to physical health, but it's kind of like the pain.
It's kind of like positivity too. There's something about kindness is a funny thing as far as a trait, because you feel like you're self-certain. Like, who says, hi, I'm Sandy, I'm a kind person, glad to meet you. Or you feel like you're not supposed to say that about yourself. There's some words that we use that we're proud of, or we have no problem saying, oh, I'm courageous, or, maybe that's not a good example, but it's not a describer word, but I'll tell you, I'll never forget it. My mother said to me as an adult, I remember where we were sitting in the whole bit, and she said, I was upset about something. And she said, and it's like actually making me verklempt. She said, you are the kindest person I know. Your dad and I talk about that all the time. And my parents are the kindest people. Yeah. And we said, we look at each other and say, where did she come from? She couldn't have come from us, because she's so kind and she's much kinder than us. It's the best compliment I've ever been given in my life. And people are like, oh, and I've got a lot of great compliments. When you're 53, you get a lot of, but it isn't the ones that are professional. It isn't the ones about, you did this or you did this feat. If I thought through what was the most impactful or best compliment I've ever been given, it was that compliment from my mom. Doesn't everybody want to be kind?
Right.
Or you hope that you do it in such a way and so consistently that it's a trait that you're recognized for, not just an act, right? Back to that small things. It's a consistent way of being.
Yes, it's a core value.
It's a core value.
I love that. And it would resonate with me too. I'm going to tell you what resonates with me too, though, is when somebody tells me how kind my children are.
Yes.
That's the other thing that I'm like, yay, that's a mom win. I'm going to take it. If that's what somebody walks away with after they've been with my children. Amen. I'm like, thank you. Because that's just something that you want to pass on to people.
Right.
Yeah. So.
And what's funny, back to acts of kindness, you're talking about kids. I have one son that very much doesn't like the spotlight, but he also doesn't think people should put themselves in the spotlight.
Mhm.
So he probably doesn't remember because he was in high school and this happened with the TV, but he'd be the first one to say, why are you on TV talking about a random act of kindness?
Right,
Like,
right.
that would just rub him wrong.
Right.
But he always kind of had problems with, I don't say problems, but it kind of rubbed him wrong when I was on boards or a trustee and I got the professional accolades because people will do that. That wasn't my intent. I didn't do it just to get business, but a lot of people will when they're in the professional world because
right.
it's a networking. And he, it kind of conflicted him a little bit. And he would challenge me on things like, do you really need to have your name on the wall? And why don't you do that anonymously? And he looked at things a little bit more differently. And it was actually good for me because it's easy to get on the train of, I'm going to be the gold sponsor, or will I be on the letterhead for the board?
Right.
Because when you get that, it's kind of a drug, right? And what's your intent?
What's your intent? So that's so interesting because I'm thinking of a couple of examples of donating money anonymously. We've done it ourselves, and I have a friend who did it one time, and there was this whole conversation about all the names printed in the newsletter, and neither of our names were included in these newsletters, like my friend's name on this other thing and ours on this other, because it was all anonymous. And it was a little bit like, oh, I wonder if all of our friends and stuff think that we didn't give and that we're not giving, or like it was a
Right.
real torn. We were very torn
because that also pressures, no, it kind of does, because it tells other people, well, or it encourages,
or it tells other people, but it was a little bit like, well, we did make the decision to do it anonymously, but we're not included in this whole list of hundreds of people. It's not like, it was 5 people. It was like hundreds of people giving. And so, and it was my friend in the same situation. So I remember having this discussion. So what's right? Like,
well, like Garrett would always say, so with 2 of the 3 kids, we were, I don't know, them, I don't know. We're asked to be on, the symphony, like the debutante ball.
The guild,
I don't know what it is, but like everybody gets dressed up.
Art, yeah.
And must have been the youngest 2 kids. But with Ben, Garrett was the one, he's like, Sandy, this is stupid money. Like, not what's out of our pocket. His point was, because I had to buy tuxes for everyone. You bought a table of 12, just the cost to show up at the event so you can have all the pictures. And again, I'm not condemning other people, but he's back to practical Garrett. He said, what charity, who's benefiting here? Write him a check for that. And so what we did is, we accepted, and I just wrote a check for what we would have spent for all those things directly to the charity. And we went to Colorado instead. And we went to like an Avalanche game, and we spent the weekend in Colorado because it was also time away. Cause I'm like, well, you need to come to Omaha. We were planning all around it. And it was his voice of reason that said, okay, is this about you? Like, so you can have family pictures in, or is it about the charity? Is it really about the charitable work that 17-year-old Ben does? Not.
Right.
And then what happened was they asked with Grant, and I just said, I'm sure somebody else would love to be a part of this, but I'm going to decline. And again, I'm not trying to say bad against that, but it was Garrett's eyes that had me look at it differently. Am I doing this so I can have the pictures?
Right.
And if I really back to there's no right answer. But the way I figured it is we all ended up the same. Once I made the commitment, and in fact, more went to the charity.
Right. They actually, you donated and another family went. And so it was,
it was win-win. But those are tough ones. Because
those are tough.
And it's kind of fun to be all over me on that and like challenge me. But again, back to, it's so easy to say, get rid of the whole event, have everybody write a check to the charity. Well, that wouldn't happen,
Right.
That would not happen.
Yeah.
You hate to say it, but it wouldn't happen. So the reason they do all these events, and you can talk about how much it costs to have the MCs and all the food, and wouldn't it be great if all the money just went with no expenses and we just sent a check, but that's not reality. That's not the real.
We did an event at my kids' school when they were little, and we started it was gallery night. I don't know if you remember.
I went a couple of times.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we started this gallery night, and I
Right.
remember when we started it, there was the school wanted to do something, and
Mhm.
they wanted to we were going to benefit the art department, and I was so torn because I'm like, we are an affluent school. Why are we asking families to donate money for this kiln that the art teacher wants? Like, we're an affluent school. The money that we collect needs to go to a school that doesn't have the funds. And so I debated with the principal over and over again. And finally, we came to the decision that we would raise the money for the kiln. He's like, she's not going to get it unless we raise the money. I'm like, all right. And then I said, so can we give 50% to another school?
Nice.
And so it was like, that's the only way. I was like, that's the only way I can participate, is if at least we're giving some money to a sister school that is, needs the funds more than we do.
Right.
We don't
Right.
need-
That's great.
It was, well,
But
it was,
it's having the courage to stand up for things. And again, but it is acts of kindness, because why do people, back to, you do gestures, you can also help people that are in need. And
right.
what was it, a movie I was watching? It's a Better Call Saul, actually. That series, how the guy said, she came up and she's like, look, I can help you out, blah, blah, blah. He's like, oh, you're one of those people that writes the check to all the charities and shows up in your clothes and walks around and thinks you can spend the rest of the week feeling good. You probably just show up for church too, don't you? And I'm like, oh, don't be that person, Sandy, don't be that person. But it's so easy to be that person.
Yeah, it is. I agree.
It's so easy to be that person. And I've been that person before.
Yeah.
I've been on both sides of
Yeah.
the kindness factor, where I needed to be a little bit more chill and forgiving and less uptight about things. Yeah.
Right.
What's the word?
Well, that in itself is an act of kindness.
Right.
When we're forgiving and we're accepting.
Right. And the interesting thing I found when I talked to people, because I took the approach of saying, what's an act of kindness? What did you see? And I kind of tried to say, what about, even within COVID?
Mhm.
And it's like people couldn't come up with one thing, but there was a general feel that through COVID, people really were yearning compassion and not cruelty. Because it was a cruel year from a lot of things. And I'm not going to get into politics. But
From things we couldn't control.
And then it was a cruel year and some people behaved cruelly.
Mhm.
And people, especially by fall, they were yearning for compassion. They were yearning for the stories of compassion. And again, not everyone,
Right.
but we had this yearning of, we want to, who are the front end workers? We wanted a
Right.
hero. We wanted a voice of reason.
Yeah.
There's a reason, like, we like to hear Fauci's voice, because
Right.
he had compassion and he talked to us in terms we understood. And it's like looking for the helpers, right?
Right.
We all were looking for the helpers, and so that was kind of the theme I heard was, I can't think of one thing or one person, but we all sought out those little things, thanking our server when we went in,
Mhm.
finding
Right.
joy in the little things in life,
Yes.
chilling out.
Yes. I think it was a year of a big perspective and reaching out to people and making sure that people felt connected and not isolated. So the people
Yes,
who
that were most at
typically-
risk.
Yes, we were trying to make sure. So part of my research, this acts of kindness and stuff like that, I saw an article about the suicide rate last year dropping. All right.
Okay.
But I couldn't find the science behind it. But I thought it was very interesting, this idea. Like, I couldn't verify that. So we thought that 2020 was going to be COVID was going to be this really bad thing for people who had depression and anxiety and, stuff like that. But what the article I read, and I didn't I'm not going to attach it because I don't know all the facts around
Right.
it, but they said,
No fake news from us.
I know, but it mentioned that the people reaching out helped others, like they felt like they were part of the club. Like everybody was going through this together. So it wasn't the people who had anxiety and stuff like that weren't alone. Does that make
Part of the
sense?
club,
They
yes.
were like, everybody's going through this together. Everybody's feeling the same
I
thing.
think that a
I'm
barrier
not
went
alone.
down on the stigma of mental health issues too.
I do too.
I feel like there was a turn there that people have become more compassionate of each other.
Right, right. And we need to, yes. And we need to reach out. We need to connect. We
Right.
need to accept. We need
Right.
to care
Right.
and acts of kindness. Okay.
So, motivation.
Motivation. All right.
Motivation.
Okay. So really quick, let's do
Okay.
our wrap question. And my dogs want to come in.
Okay.
We're doing
least we
table
don't have-
topics.
We don't have Zeke jumping on the door.
Oh, I'm not doing this one. We've done this question before.
Okay.
In which
Hello.
activity would you like a lesson from an expert? Oh my gosh.
In what activity? Yoga. I haven't done yoga and I've heard a lot about yoga, but I would like
You've
to
never
get
done yoga?
very few times. And I actually I had a lot of issues with ear infections when I was young.
Oh,
And because of that, I get dizzy really easy and think about all the bending over.
mhm.
So I end up faking it half the time. But I think if I had a really good expert, they could get me past the dizziness.
I love that. So there's a pose in the Bikram, the hot yoga.
Okay.
If you do the Bikram sequence, that I get dizzy every time I do it. It's
Okay.
so interesting to me, and it's such an easy
And then
pose.
I feel sick when I get dizzy. So it really defeats the purpose. But I
It's-
want to do it because I know it's good.
Yeah, it's the easiest pose. You're like on your knees and you lean back and look up. And for some reason in the sequence, I hit a wall and I like get dizzy, get nauseous. I can't do that one pose. It's so interesting to me. So anyway, I love yoga. That's a good expert one.
Okay.
I'm there. Oh my gosh, there's so many. I'm gonna say golf. I would love.
Oh, that's a
I've
great thing. I've had
taken-
great golf lessons.
I've taken golf lessons, but I would love to like dig in some more. So anyway, okay.
Good. I love it.
All right. Well, this was a good conversation. Thank you, Sandy, again.
Right,
And thanks
next
for
time we
being
won't be in
here.
person
I
unless I
know.
surprise.
I know. Maybe
Oh,
I'll
look, I'm back. Hello.
maybe I'll come to Colorado.
Oh,
That would be fun.
yes. All right.
All
Bye,
right.
Amy.
Bye.